Some of the influential events include being pulled out of line, which will be explained later. A German soldier, i.e. Wilhelm, is saving Vladislav. And the Siege of Warsaw. If you did not take this away from the first part, when I do the influences, the events or characters, the middle one is, in my opinion, the most important. Just an FYI. The first influential event we will be analyzing on how it changes Vladislav's perspective is being pulled in a line. Now, I said I'd explain that pretty much what that means is the Germans brought in a certain, German and Jewish police brought in a certain number of people per day. They wanted to meet their quota. Now, basically what a quota is if you work in a factory, you have a monthly or a daily quota. That means you want to produce a certain amount of product in a day to be on average track for a goal set in the future. So you think of quota, it's not really a word used with humans, but the Germans do not view the Jews as humans. So Vladislav was brought in with his family, so somebody met their quota, bringing his family in with them. And they were brought to a train station where they would be deported to a concentration camp. This was a few months before the Siege of Warsaw. So Vladislav is just starting to get introduced to depression. He's had the root of the siege, which will be explained later, but he's just starting to feel the depression. And at this point, he's like, you know what? I've seen so much brutality. I've seen so much happen to my family, myself, and my people. I'd just like to go die with my family. And he thinks that way. He truly does. But a soldier actually pulls him out of line. It's either a Jewish police officer or a German soldier. He never sees who it is. And he thinks, why would you, he's dazed. He's thinking, why would you do this to me? I just wanted to die with my family. And then he turns to the person, doesn't catch their face, but they scream, what are you doing? Run. And it finally snaps in his head, and he just starts running. Vladislav states, with every step I took along the pavement, I became lonelier. Filtzman 108. That loneliness sets off his depression. The Siege of Warsaw, which once again will be explained in a minute, that was a kind of kindling for that. And this was just the loneliness that set the fire off. It lit the kindling on fire. And this is where the perspective Vladislav gets throughout the main part of the book of depression and suicide. This is where it starts, really. It gets that extra boost of loneliness, really, the element of it, to start off his depression. And this really changes his perspective. It changes how he looks at everything in the world, how he thinks of himself, just everything. It changes his whole perspective on life. The next influential event on Vladislav's perspective we will be looking at is the Siege of Warsaw. The siege is when the Germans start to invade the city, and they actually capture the city. And there's been 2 days of fighting, and Vladislav has been locked up in his third-floor apartment with his family. And he actually goes to work the next day, and he comes home, and he says this, I came home in a deep depression. The city no longer existed. Spiltzman 40. As I said, I'd explain. I said in my other statement that the siege was the kindling. This is where he first starts to lose his optimism, starts to not think, oh, well, the Nazis will just go, they'll go eventually, the Allies will come and take back the city. This is really where he starts to actually see how bad it is going to be for him, his family, and all the other Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. This isn't as large of a perspective change as the other two events. But really what it is it's a crack in his perspective. And then when the light shines through it, which is the being pulled out of line, or rather shadow, because it's a negative event, this is when that crack fills up with the darkness, and his perspective completely changes to depression. This is the complete root. This is the exact root of his depression. And this is where it starts. This is, like I said before, not really a perspective change, but the root of his entire perspective change. The next event that we will be analyzing and looking at that changes Vladislav's perspective is the German soldier, or Wilhelm Hosenfeld, saving Vladislav from certain death. I have used this, both as character and event, as the most important because it has the largest change in perspective. As you can tell by the bulk of what I have been saying about Wilhelm, he is the most influential character, and him saving Vladislav is one of the most influential events. So he's one of the most important characters and one of the most important events in this diary. And as I've said before in my little mini biography of Captain Wilhelm Hosenfeld, he was an active duty captain in the First World War, where he was in the battlefield. But during the time of the Second World War, they deemed him too old and unfit for service in the battlefield. So he works with the gymnasium unit, where he teaches the German soldiers gym games to keep them fit. Wilhelm states, "If you and I have survived this inferno for 5 years," he replied, "it's obviously God's will for us to live." Spiltzman 181. This character, not to mention the event of Vladislav coming across him, are two of the largest parts of his survival. The event brings Vladislav food, comfort for the war's end, moral support, as well as clothing. Wilhelm gives him his military overcoat. I actually have a quote. Vladislav states, "My officer left me a German military overcoat to keep me from freezing." Spiltzman 184. That keeps Vladislav safe and dry from the freezing Poland winter. So the event leads to them meeting, which leads to Vladislav's both physical and mental survival. Wilhelm starts to bring him food, which is his physical survival, as well as give him moral support and keep bringing him news about the war's end, which is his mental survival. So I've described roots of depression in this book, but what Wilhelm is, the event of Vladislav meeting Wilhelm, is the root of Vladislav's survival in his brain. It's the root of his mental stability. It's the root of his optimist thinking towards the war's end, which arguably is the only reason why he survived. If he didn't meet Wilhelm, which was a very important event, he would have never met the character, and the character would have never gave him moral support, would have never brought him food. So really, the importance of the character even ties back to the root of it, which is Wilhelm saving Vladislav. So Wilhelm meeting him isn't as much of a perspective change, but more of a root. It leads him to talk to Wilhelm further, discuss things about the war, which Wilhelm eventually leads to Vladislav's survival. So this isn't, like I've said, this is like I've described before, more of a crack, or a small fragment in Vladislav's perspective that leads to a larger fragment and completes his mental stability. And when those two topics are introduced, they really complete each other, not as fragments, but as a new perspective. So the event and the character combine with each other, character as being the larger perspective change, and the meeting of both of them being more of the root. They combine together and make a very large, huge perspective change for Vladislav. Vladislav Filtzman's personal diary, entitled The Pianist, is a great example of how, as conflicts emerge, perspectives change. There have been many characters and events throughout the book that have changed Vladislav's perspective. Some of the images you see in this presentation are just from Google Images, and some of them, like the picture of the glasses and the poison, they are from msn.com/ghosts of Auschwitz. Also, there's a great website out there simply titled filzman.net, SZPILMAN.net. It's about Mr. Filtzman. It's a network site about him. It's about some parts of his book and his life after the war and after the book's end.